Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal. How did he change America? He redefined democracy and got us out of the Great Depression. Let's see what FDR did. We already know the causes of the Great Depression that happened, the stock market crash in 1932. Farms were overproducing, industry was overproducing, there weren't enough people to buy the goods. The rich were getting richer and the poor were getting poorer. There was an overextension of credit, people buying stocks on margin and line. And overall, as Europe was getting back on its feet, we lost them as a customer. So therefore, the Great Depression. Let's see what happens after this. Herbert Hoover, who was president during the Great Depression, he played the game of confidence economics. He just kept saying prosperity is right around the corner. He really didn't do much. He kept expecting things to get better on their own. After a while, though, he realized he had to do some things, so he came up with the National Credit Association and the Organization for Unemployment Relief. Neither one of them were really very effective, and things did not change much. In the end, Hoover decided he had to do even more. He tried the Reconstruction Finance Corporation and the Home Loan Bank Act. But again, too little, too late, and the Depression was only getting worse. Hoover and the country were in big trouble. Why was it ineffective? He thought that business should take care of their own, self-regulating. He did not believe in the government stepping in. He also wasn't a very good politician. As you can see in the picture here, the Democrats, which are the party of the donkey, is talking about prohibition. The old familiar songs, they kept saying that Hoover's doing the same thing over and over again. And here he was trying to calm down businesses. The drought that was going on out west, crops were dying, people were starving. Things were not good, and Hoover could not do anything about it. Franklin Roosevelt goes to run for president in 1932. He had been the governor of New York, assistant secretary of the Navy, came from a very prominent, rich, well-to-do family in New York. Why was he so appealing to the people? People saw him as a man of action, while they saw Hoover as doing nothing. Norman Thomas, a socialist candidate, was a radical, which meant his views were way out of line. No one really liked him. So as a result, Roosevelt wins in a landslide. One of the ironies of Roosevelt being the man of action, he had contracted polio when he was an adult and was essentially crippled. He wore very heavy braces, could only walk with 2 canes and aides holding him up. He spent most of his time in the wheelchair, but because of the type of media we had back then, he was almost never seen that way. Most people weren't even aware of that. He was either standing, they had propped him up before the speeches and the crowds would leave, or he'd go behind a curtain, or he was sitting in a comfortable chair. So the man who was so frail physically was seen as a very vital and healthy and strong person. His personality overcame his physical limitations. As you can see, the election of 32 was a landslide, with Hoover barely taking just a few states in the Northeast, where the rest was all Roosevelt. When he did become president in 1933, the country was virtually leaderless, and the banks and the economic system was collapsing. In his initial inauguration address, one of the most famous speeches in American history, Roosevelt says, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." I want you to take a moment or two, think about that, because I am going to ask you what that means. Again, he promised leadership, bold action. He wanted discipline and cooperation among all the different factions of this, the private sector, business, government. He needed everyone to pull together. His personal qualities, which were so strong in his leadership, he was a good politician. He was very charismatic, which meant that people really liked him. He knew how to talk to them. He knew how to work the press very well. He was also willing to experiment, which was very, very important. As you'll see in the next coming lessons, he tried new things. Unlike Hoover, who was a do-nothing president and wanted to stay the course, Roosevelt, it was imperative and important that he change everything. Also, he was a very snappy dresser and wore very cool bow ties. So what were the purposes of the New Deal? The 3 R's, and you should know these: relief, recovery, and reform. And the whole idea was to save capitalism. Capitalism is our basis of the economic system of America. And as you can see again in this little political cartoon, these are all the agencies and changes Roosevelt's going to make. We'll talk about those in the next few days. And he also says we may have to change the remedies if we don't get the results. He was telling Congress, be prepared. If we have to change it, we're going to change it. It's not going to be the status quo. Where did he get his ideas? He assembled a brain trust, specialists, college ideal men, people who knew what was going on. He went to the experts, the new economics. He tried deficit spending in public works. We'll talk about that some more. He also started a cabinet, his advisors. He got not just people who agreed with him, but people from all different parties, ideologies. He wanted people to disagree with him. He wanted to hear new ideas. By the way, this is President Kennedy's father, who was part of Roosevelt's brain trust. The first New Deal, as you'll see, he was emphasizing reform, economic recovery. He knew we were going to have higher prices for agriculture and business, and big business and agricultural business was going to be the people who are going to wind up with that. So that's it for now. We'll see some more later on.